grassroots Tea Party-ish organization, but it's really astroturfing by the same cast of characters I just described.
Brandy, thank you so much. And can I just say how well you handle reporting on this and all the responses that you get? And we're just so grateful to have you. Thank you so much, Brandy. And we actually now have some breaking news.
Yeah, we do have an update on the vote in Pennsylvania. We want to take a look at that. But our understanding is that Joe Biden, yes, has now taken the lead in Pennsylvania as the votes continue to come in. He is now up by 5,587 votes. We assume that we had votes coming in from the Philadelphia area where Joe Biden has been gaining by huge margins. He's been winning the mail-in votes coming out of those areas with 80–90% of the vote. So this was sort of what knew was inevitable, that Joe Biden was continuing to close the gap. The question was, at what point would he finally reach Donald Trump's total and even take the lead? And then the question now will be, how much further is this going to go? How big of a lead could Joe Biden build? Because it's very clear the momentum across the state is that he's gaining votes as all of these mail-in votes and these absentee ballots are counted.
I think that's a really, really important thing to point out there, that this is what we expected. While it is a big vote shift, it is not something that was necessarily a surprise. Of course, we did not know how exactly the numbers were going to shake out. But President Trump was encouraging his supporters, people who were going to vote for him, to actually show up on the polls at Election Day. We had that big lead for President Trump because they did, in fact, seem to listen to that. As these mail-in votes come in, we are seeing them go towards Joe Biden's favor, which again is exactly what we are expecting. We're saying we have 95% of that vote in. It is still too close to call. We have been getting these in batches. As Joe just mentioned, we were waiting on these a lot from the Philadelphia area, some also over from on the other side of the state, the Pittsburgh area, both two Democratic areas that we were still waiting for the most amount of those mail-in votes to be counted and come in.
I don't know exactly how many points are left to how many votes are left to count in Pennsylvania. I know as of this morning it was around 160,000. Clearly, we've taken some of that number off. But what's interesting to note is that, well, you might look at this map and say, okay, well, if votes coming in, absentee ballots from red areas, it's going to help President Trump, and blue areas Biden. That has not been the case. The case has really been, even in red areas, when the mail-in votes are counted, Joe Biden is still doing well, maybe not by the same margins that he's doing in a Philadelphia or a Pittsburgh, but pretty much all the mail-in votes that are coming in continue to help Joe Biden. At first, it was help him catch up. Now it appears it's going to help him with his lead. We want to go straight to Wilmington, Delaware, in the Biden campaign. Our Ali Vitale is there. So, Ali, I don't know if you're getting any reaction yet at this point. Now that we've seen these numbers come in, it is what we've expected. But what are your thoughts now as Joe Biden has taken the lead in battleground Pennsylvania?
This is something that all morning I've been texting with sources on the campaign about, and one of them said to me they were expecting this drop at some point between 8 and 9 o'clock, just like we're seeing right now, and they were saying that they were very confident. I feel like that's the most used word in my phone right now because that's the mood of the campaign over the course of the last 3 days. They have felt that once every vote is counted, they would be the victor here, and that's been true across the board, but they especially felt that way in Pennsylvania, where everyone from state Democrats there to the local Democratic Party in Pennsylvania, all the way up to the Biden campaign, has been saying that they felt really good about their chances there in the Keystone State. And it's partially because of what you guys were just saying about mail-in ballots. That was something that Democrats in the Biden campaign really pushed voters to do. The whole idea of planning your vote, not waiting until Election Day, that's something that Democrats really got behind in the lead up to the Democratic National Convention all the way through election season. And so when you see the way that those mail-in votes are breaking for Biden, that's part of a huge reason why the counting has taken so long, because you got to count those ballots now, but also why the Biden campaign was willing to be so patient, because they really saw that mail-in ballots were always trending for him, and they were confident that that would remain the case here in Pennsylvania ultimately once all of these votes came in.
Now, Ali, we've seen through this morning Biden taking the lead in both Pennsylvania and Georgia. He's sort of been eking these out as these mail-in ballots are counted. I'm curious to hear a little bit about how the Biden campaign feels about each of those states. Georgia, was that sort of a cherry on top attitude as far as the path to 270 here versus Pennsylvania and where they are expecting to net out as these continue to be counted?
Yeah, I mean, it's also just the sheer number of electoral votes that come with each of those states. Pennsylvania carrying 20 votes. I mean, that puts Biden over where he needs to be at 273. And so obviously that one was really very important to them in terms of looking at the electoral map. And again, they always felt good about their chances in Pennsylvania. It's the state that Joe Biden was always the senator from next door. It's also the state that he campaigned in the most during the general election. So they really invested the time there over the course of these last few weeks and months in trying to win back Pennsylvania. You see it in areas like Erie, Pennsylvania, too. When I was following the Trump campaign in 2016, we started seeing a lot of these previously blue areas show signs of life for conservatives and Republicans that weren't very expected. And so clearly Joe Biden able, at least in some of the western parts of the state, to turn back that tide a little bit. In terms of Georgia, the campaign always thought that it was going to be a toss-up, but at the same time, they thought that they would have an edge there, again, once the votes were counted. And I think there's something really poetic about the fact that John Lewis's home county, Clayton County, was the county that results came in and ultimately pushed him into the lead there. He is someone, of course, the Voting Rights Act, key to his messaging when he was in Congress, something that Joe Biden and Democrats have really carried across the finish line after we lost him several months ago. And so it really was sort of a poetic way to get ahead in Georgia, again, even as those votes still continue to be counted.
Allie, we're going to have you stay with us, and we're going to bring in NBC News' Carrie Dan, who has also been looking at the numbers with us. So, Carrie, I'm looking here. We know Philadelphia dropped the numbers that gave Biden the lead. It looks like there's still a little more than 20,000 mail-in ballots left to process in Philadelphia, which means Joe Biden is likely going to grow that lead even more. We have to keep in mind, President Trump won Pennsylvania by about 40,000. 4 years ago. What are we thinking right now for Joe Biden and his odds here in Pennsylvania moving forward?
Well, what just happened and why you see Joe Biden now in the lead in Pennsylvania? We got a load of new vote from Philadelphia. We've been expecting this all morning. We got about 31,000, 32,000 new mail from Philadelphia. But you're right, there's another 21,000 or so left to process, and that's just in Philly. Keep in mind that also we're waiting for a vote from Allegheny County. That's the Pittsburgh area. That's been breaking heavily for Biden as well. There's about 35,000 votes left to process, and probably right about now, elections officials are starting on that last batch there. And as we've been saying throughout the morning and throughout the last few days, Biden's also improving on Hillary Clinton's margins, even in some of the more rural or blue-collar areas of Pennsylvania. So now really the waiting game is to see the rest of the vote that comes in and how much Joe Biden is able to keep increasing that lead. He's been creeping up for days. I mean, it's 36 hours ago. Donald Trump's lead in this state was maybe a 5.5%. Now we're looking at Joe Biden creeping ahead and creeping ahead and creeping ahead. And as vote continues to come in from these key blue counties and also from the rest of the state, we anticipate that that lead is going to continue to grow. Biden officials at one point were saying they thought that they were going to get to a 200,000 vote lead over Donald Trump. That's a very, very high marker. But at least as of right now, we know that he's in the lead, and we expect that lead to grow.
All right, I think we still have Ali Vitale with us, who I do want to ask one more question to here. So now, for rough context, between 10 p.m. last night and right now, we've received approximately 51,644 mail-in ballot results. But again, we've still got, as Joe mentioned, about 21,000 that we're waiting on. It appears that they've sort of been coming in sporadically. So we don't know when that counting will be completed. But since we have seen Biden come ahead here in these two key states, in Philadelphia and Georgia, or excuse me, in Pennsylvania and Georgia, Ali, as you noted, Pennsylvania alone would put him over that 270. Do we have any idea of when we might hear from the Biden campaign or when we might see Biden himself?
I think that really has been the question of the last 24 hours, as we see them sort of on the precipice here, but waiting for the official call that they have gotten to 270. And of course, that call comes from the decision desk at NBC News and other networks that have similar setups to how they call these elections. We're not there yet, but we are seeing these vote margins continue to tighten, in this case of Pennsylvania, to flip. And so that's all things that the Biden campaign is really looking at. What we have seen on the ground here, though, and we were talking about this last hour, is there's sort of that energy in the air that something is about to happen. You see people, again, with the stage behind me that has been set up, frankly, since election night, All of that is starting to be tinkered with. We've seen them sort of at the ready here in case they wanted to do something as soon as they got to 270. Of course, we're all playing that waiting game as well, waiting for that official count to happen. But I think that's very much the machination inside of Biden world right now, is they're waiting for the official call, and they see a few different ways that they can get to it. Pennsylvania, of course, is chief among them, but also Nevada and Arizona. Those also will take a little bit more time. We know the voting process in Nevada, if you were listening to their press briefing yesterday, they're not even sure exactly how many votes they still have outstanding. That vote counting could go till Saturday or Sunday. If you're the Biden campaign, I'm sure you can understand why they would want to wrap this up sooner rather than later. But there's also the reality that the Trump campaign has a bunch of legal challenges that they're trying to put out in a lot of these battleground states. And so for the Biden folks, yes, winning in Pennsylvania would put them over. Technically, that would get them to the place where they're the president-elect. But at the same time, the more electoral votes that they can amass in this, waiting for Nevada, waiting for Arizona, those are states that they think are going to flip to them. Same with Georgia. All of that is technically icing on the cake. But what it really does is it solidifies them to a place where the legal challenges get a little bit less in the weeds for them, and they can focus on going full steam ahead then.
Let's expand our conversation right now and go to the White House and bring in NBC News correspondent Kelly O'Donnell. So, Kelly, we've seen this news coming in here in just the last few minutes. We kind of knew it was probably going to happen, but Joe Biden now has taken the lead in Pennsylvania, and there's still more votes to count, and clearly the votes have been favoring Biden. Are you getting any reaction so far from the White House or the Trump campaign?
Not yet, but you can anticipate what that reaction is, that certainly Pennsylvania was a big piece of the Trump plan to win re-election, to claim those 20 electoral votes, and sort of the story of the discharge so far for President Trump because of the early, seemingly strong lead on Election Day when the initial results were coming in. Same day, President Trump was able to turn out in even greater numbers than he had 4 years ago. And then as we've watched as additional counting of mail-in ballots has come over these last couple of days, and now Joe Biden overtaking the lead in Pennsylvania. Legal challenges, that's the next phase. Certainly the Trump campaign has assembled teams in several key states where they will have a legal representative, a PR representative, a state director who knows where the votes for their side should reside, meaning they've studied this for months, they know all of the precincts, they know the counties, and they know what level of vote count remains to still be identified and tabulated. So don't expect any quick response from the campaign or the White House, except to say that this is now into a new phase, which will be the litigation phase. The president was very clear about that when he came to the White House briefing room late yesterday, describing his own definition of how he saw this race. He believes that he was the winner early, even before the game was over, so to speak, and will try to take this to the next level of looking for legal pathways. Now, what are those legal pathways? That's a big question because the Trump campaign has not provided evidence of specific issues in a number of about the matter of being able to have observers while the counting process is going in and the dispute that they litigated over how close those observers could get to the actual voting in order to be able to see the ballots and see that things were following the process. When it gets to the litigation phase, it gets deep in the weeds, it gets very arcane, and often, if we just look at elections, generally speaking, the litigation phase can be long, costly, difficult, and it's very, very hard to shift votes or to find an issue that strikes a certain number of votes. So it's a long shot is, I think, the simplest way to describe it. These have been disappointing, frustrating, angering days for the Trump side, where they believe they had that Tuesday strong showing. And as the counting has continued, the pathways to 270 for the president, while they still may technically exist, if there is some way to resolve Pennsylvania to his favor, and you've been discussing all the reasons why that is unlikely, but this is a very dire time and a phase for the Trump campaign of having to make some assessments about where the race with any legal challenges, and is there any math? They've been stressing to us data and math, not opinions, were going to drive their response to all of this. Is that the case today? That's what we need to find out. This is obviously news that they anticipated simply by looking at the curve and knowing where the votes were still outstanding in Pennsylvania. And you heard the president railing against cities like Philadelphia, making allegations that he did not support. And so this is going to be a difficult, challenging period for the Trump campaign and by extension for the White House. Joe, Savannah?
Thanks so much, Kelly. And Allie, I'm wondering if you can sort of respond to what Kelly's just laid out there for us about what the president's plan will likely be moving forward in the state of Pennsylvania. Even before we had just seen that Biden has eked ahead in this state, we knew that he had added a member of his impeachment team, Jay Sekulow, to his legal team specifically in this state. What will the Biden campaign's response be to these legal challenges they're bringing?
To fight them unprepared with a team of lawyers. So did the Biden campaign, because the Trump campaign has long been telegraphing, and this is something that Donald Trump has said even before he nominated Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court, that he would take this election to the Supreme Court if he had to. It's obviously something he's reiterated since then, but the Biden campaign team feels like they've been able to read the tea leaves of the Trump campaign strategy at each step of the way in terms of how legally they could take this on. I would also point out, and people who are actually lawyers, not ones that just read about it so they can talk about it on TV, have said that a lot of these claims are pretty dubious. It's not exactly clear, for example, when Trump says that he would take it to the Supreme Court, how he would even do that, because you'd need a specific suit in order to actually elevate it to the highest court in the land. And so that's certainly one of the things that the Biden team is looking at. They've got lawyers at the ready. They've got the Biden Fight Fund, which effectively funds all of these legal efforts, election protection efforts in states for Biden and down ballot Democrats as well. They're ready on this, but the lawyer who's leading that effort for the Biden team, Bob Bauer, has said that a lot of the claims that he's seen out of the Trump campaign so far are meritless and silliness, and he's confident that if they have to go there with the Trump campaign, they'll win.
We want to make it clear here again, Pennsylvania is still too close to call at this point, according to NBC News. The news here is just that Biden has now surpassed Trump and has a 5,500 vote lead with more votes still to be counted. Carrie, I want to bring you in here to see if you can kind of give us a little bit of guidance. We know that here at NBC News, like other news organizations, we have a decision desk. They're the ones who decide whether to call a state or whether to call an election. Obviously, right now, still too close to call Pennsylvania. But help us understand, broadly speaking, what are the types of things these decision desks are looking at when they decide whether to call a state?
So what our decision desk does is put together statistical modeling, very, very sophisticated, many PhDs in the room in the creation of those things. Me with my Bachelor of Arts, I am not in that room. I'm here talking to you. But they create these statistical models so that they can plug in data as they get it and see if it is matching. It's based on previous elections, and it's based on a lot of different kinds of mathematical scenarios that can happen. They have to reach a point where they believe with 99.5% confidence that there is no possible path to victory for the opponent of the person who the race is called for. So at this time, as you said, Joe, this is too close to call. We are still looking at the data as it is coming in. Yes, it has been looking favorable for Joe Biden all along the way, but at the same time, as we've been saying throughout this process, there is no rush to do this because you have to do it correctly and you've got to be right. Pulling back a state call is something that nobody ever wants to do. We are going to do it when we are absolutely confident, and when we're ready to declare a winner, we're not at that point yet.
I do just want to let everybody know here on this panel that we have a special report coming up momentarily from NBC News that we will throw to in about 30 seconds here. But thank you all so much for being with us. And I think, Carrie, the last thing that I just want to follow up with you on there is just sort of, do we have any type of idea here, last thing just in the last few seconds, on timing whatsoever from